A lump formed in Desala's throat as she spotted Letzi, walking down the hall in the dorms. It was everyone's first day back, and her former friend was headed towards the common rooms, carrying her omnipad and binder, probably heading off to study with the others. The packet of crystalline powder she'd been given, carefully secreted in her room, weighed on the back of her mind like an anchor. She swallowed. It was time to sink or swim. "Letzi, wait up a moment, please." She hurried up the hall, as Letzi glanced back at her. The look wasn't welcoming. If Letzi had any idea of her reasons now... She pushed her guilt into a ball and shoved it down deep inside herself as she caught up. "Look, I know you don't want to talk to me, and we didn't part on good terms the last time, but just give me a minute, please." "All right, Desala." Letzi crossed her arms and leaned back against the wall. "What is it?" The sheer display of disdain made her want to bristle, but she couldn't afford the luxury. Not now. She took a deep breath. "I want to apologize. I did some thinking over the break. I was out of line with you and the others. Not just wrong. I was mean. I let my pride get the best of me, and I want to try and make it up to you." Letzi seemed to unfold a bit, looking at her like something unfamiliar and unexpected had just happened. It shouldn't have been that hard for her to believe, should it? "All right. I suppose that counts," she allowed. "I admit I'm kind of surprised, but I appreciate you saying this. I want to make this right with you, but also between me and the others." "That could be a harder sell," Letzi said with a thoughtful frown. "Things have come up. They aren't really happy with you at all." "I understand," she said forthrightly. "I promise. I'm going to do whatever I need to make things right." Sitting in the tiny ops center of the bunker behind Captain Sitar, Lieutenant Thaler listened to the briefing and nodded along. The work wasn't hard. She and her team would work an overlapping shift with Pods 5, 6, and 7, the bunker teams. But she and her girls would only pull 2 hours in the ops room every day, giving the teams a bit more of a break during their shift. The rest of the day would be PT and going over every inch of the bunker systems, from the consoles all the way out to the conduit lines deep in the access tunnels. She thought of working in the cramped underground network and tried not to swallow. She pulled in Sergeant Estelle from her task force and been given another woman, Sergeant Jeans. She didn't know Jeans at all, but Estelle was going to hate that. She wasn't wild about the idea herself, and there wasn't any reason to think Jeans would like it any better. That was the job, though. IT and civil engineers crawled where others feared to go. What confused her wasn't the work, it was the other teams. Shipboard training tended to relax into a routine of work, PT, maintenance, mission prep, and downtime. The bunker pods were doing that, but... Well, 2 of the sergeants seemed wrapped up in a board game called chess, when they weren't arguing over putting together an odd, multicolored cube. There was an active gambling pool going on over the Academy diving team, and while the bets were only barracks chores between the enlisted, things seemed to have escalated since some sort of show. The other teams were happily getting ready for something called movie night. Textbooks on Shorvanti and human history littered the break room, and even if you ignore some of the posters left up in the day rooms, alien music was playing all the time. It felt like the most chaotic thing she'd ever seen, but given the situation, 6 pods before now, and 2 women on the ground pods had just died. They were blowing off steam. Morale seemed high, but it still seemed odd. Looking over the setup in the ops center, she had her work cut out for her. The bunker was mothballed when the objective, or an objective at least, wasn't studying at the academy. Some of the instrumentation was brand new, but it was mixed in and patched along sensor suites that must have been 20 years old. Still perfectly good, but not the latest. The IR and UV sensor suite covered the entire campus, but the spot mics? They actually had spot mics covering everything. So, Captain Tshirt swiveled back around in her chair and looked at her expectantly. Any questions, Lieutenant? One or two. It was the second day after school resumed. The fall break was over, but the campus was in a stir. The story around Admiral Tajo's death wasn't leading the news. That was all Satora and the investigation, but rumours about the fatalities before the holiday break had gotten out. There wasn't a noble with a daughter in the academy that wasn't expressing views on everything from the shocking lack of veterans' care to their praise for Warwick to positive remarks on humanity and their place in the military. Nespa said her mother was messaging her every other hour about getting Warwick back as a guest. Lark claimed to have had at least 200 offers for the story from her video blog as an exclusive, and the number went even higher when it came out she'd been there personally. It had been an interesting conversation. With everything that was going on, it seemed unusual that no one was asking uncomfortable questions about the attack itself. Lark had only shrugged. The press and the palace have an understanding, Mel. Lark was calling her by the right name, but the reporter in her still seemed to be chewing it out with exasperation. The palace and the courts give a full and honest accounting on anything that affects the public. And in return, the press doesn't ask inconvenient questions, particularly about the imperial family. Besides, with Satora taken, everyone's up in arms. Taking infants from their beds? That just isn't done. Now the entire campus was aflutter. Princess Indara was going to make an official visit. No one knew the agenda, but everyone was getting their best uniforms ready. The faculty were gossiping like mad. The ground staff were cleaning everything on grounds that were normally spotless anyway. The IOTC girls were practically hysterical. At least it had let her slip out in the woods without being noticed. Stepping inside the bunker was like walking into another world. She'd been on Navy ships before, and the inside of the bunker felt like that. Not just a set of barracks and living areas with all the rest. It felt like the inside of a ship, minus the ship. She'd understood these women were locked inside here for months, seeing to her protection every minute of the day and night. Until now, it hadn't really registered. She owed these women. 2 of them had died. She had a duty. It just felt so awkward. She'd watched her mother address troops before, either up close or at the annual parade. She'd always looked so grand. They're all lined up and looking their best after being stuck in this box for months. I'm in a school sweater and worried about my homework. Goddess, I have to say something. Captains, Lieutenant, Sergeants, I wanted to come by, now that I know you're here, and express my thanks to you all. 12 women stood at attention, while Lamana Davari remained outside. Mother never cared for the way the interior worked with the troops, and this was personal. Agent Davari had a nice apartment, could get out during the day. Her life was her own. These women were practically in jail. Arali Tajo murdered 2 people. If it weren't for your dedication, there's every chance that I and everyone around me could have been killed. I wanted to thank you personally for your dedication, and express my sympathies for the sacrifice of 2 of your podmates. That much seems safe. She'd been too embarrassed to rehearse it in front of the mirror, knowing they were probably watching. Standing in the shower had to do. The irregularities, the tampering with the systems here in the bunker, They've gotten the attention they need, and while a new addition to your ranks, I want to thank Lieutenant Thaler and Pod 8 for your efforts going forward. 12 pairs of eyes stared straight ahead of the wall. They were death's heads, the best at what they did, but she'd given them her thanks, and they were alone in a bunker. It felt silly. At ease? The women moved to parade rest in unison. It still felt wrong. What I meant was, fall out? I want to talk with you, not at you, please. The women moved a bit awkwardly until one of the captains, Fiona, nodded. The rest took that as their cue, relaxing just a bit. No surprise, but this is my first time reviewing anyone, she grinned sheepishly. You're doing just fine, Your Royal Highness. Captain Solani gave her an engaging smile. It's all right. If you'll pardon me for saying so, you don't know us, but we've come to feel like we know you. I suppose. She caught herself plucking at the cuff of her sleeve and carefully clasped her hands behind her. Anyway, besides actually meeting you, I wanted to make one request. Of course, Your Royal Highness. Captain Satar made a show of settling against one of the tables, if barely. Some of the other troopers followed suit. Sort of. Well, the only thing I'd like to ask is just one place for privacy. Aside from the bathroom, I mean. I didn't have this much scrutiny living in the palace, and while I know the security team there is tight, I'm living with a lot of other people too. She wanted to dig her hands into her back pockets, and fought off the urge. I was thinking maybe the movie room? She was looking the right way, or she wouldn't have caught it. Sergeant Roland's lip actually trembled. No, not the movie room. On second thought, that's too public. She pressed forward, covering wildly. For a death's head, the lip tremble had practically been mutiny. Study room B on my floor is better. When I go in there and ask for privacy, I'd like you to shut down surveillance, please. I promise not to do it often, but I want the option. Of course, Your Royal Highness. Setar nodded, looking to the other two captains. There's only one entrance, and we have cameras on the door. Just not too long, please. We tend to fret out here on the sidelines. I appreciate that, I do. She smiled and looked around the room. I also want to show my appreciation. You're down here all the time. Is there anything I can get for you? The women all looked at each other uncertainly, and Mel caught Roland's eye. There must be something. Well, aren't you just the tastiest plover on the bush now, lad? Jama poured the tea and looked up at him from under his bushy brows. So, how does it feel being back? I hate plover, Tom said with a wiry grin, but it's nice. I mean, Miv has stopped hovering over me all the time, mostly. I'm walking with her every day, but she let me come over to visit instead of going down to the beach. I think it's getting cold outside even for her. Tom took a sip from the tea. It was only scalding. Had a nice first class. The story has gotten around campus and girls are looking at me like I'm Conan the Librarian. I'm getting requests too. Requests? Jama asked, his smile pure mischief as he arched an eyebrow. Well, some rather personal invitations from parents. Another interview request from my student's mother. Tom frowned thoughtfully. Also, one of my students, Melondi, gave me a list. I mean, nothing I won't take care of, considering. But I guess word got out about chocolate from some people she knows. She's asked to borrow the spare Rubik's Cube from storage. And more of my movie files. Nothing odd, just a lot at once. Jama shrugged, holding his palms out. Severe disappointment, at least for him, washed over his face briefly before he grinned. I thought it was going to be something good, lad. You're not married yet, even if you're engaged. To two damn fine women, no less. I never did two at once. Well, not marrying anyway. Anyway, I know just the place to take you before you place yourself away. Jabba, do I really want to know? Tom, my boy, the elderly shill grinned. It wouldn't be half as much fun if I simply told you now, would it? Tom frowned over the rim of his teacup, as his host chuckled. You know, you asked me a question a few months back. When I was sitting in the hospital after your visit, I remembered the answer. What was the question, then? We've had more than a few conversations, lad. You once asked me about human biology. Tom frowned in recollection. I couldn't tell you when. Hell, I should have asked my doctor. But basically, is this. Around 70,000 of our years ago, that's 40,000 of yours, give or take, we had a near-species extinction, and there was another one about 40,000 before that. Each time there were under 1,000 humans left alive. According to one study I heard, there were only 22 genetic lines of women at the time, though I'm a little iffy about the details. Well, I have a fine appreciation for extinct species. Jama peered up at him as he blew on his tea. Mind, I'm not sure I follow you. Point is, it doesn't matter if there were 22 women and 22 men, or 22 women and one really tired guy. Any way you work the numbers, it still means humans fuck really well. Tom rubbed his chin thoughtfully and grinned. I'm going to give those ladies a honeymoon they'll never forget. Look at you, Mr. Confidence. Have you found out if your Shaleia is part of any denomination yet? Well, not yet. Empress help you if she follows Nyosa. He sipped his tea demurely. Isn't she the trickster goddess? Jama, can't we just get through a royal visit without you worrying me? Tom muttered. You know, one calamity at a time. It's your honeymoon, Jama crooned, drawing out every word. It sounded suspiciously like, it's your funeral. Denomination. Right. I'll ask. Special Agent Davari? Lamana Davari braced herself. The door to the office was closed. Outside, there were two Death's Head commandos on guard, while others circulated outside the building. For a visit of this scope, it seemed adequate. The idea of armed troops on the school campus would be unthinkable otherwise. But for this occasion? It felt odd being dressed in her school uniform, but she bowed appropriately and held the pose. Your Royal Highness. Resplendent in her full dress uniform, Her Royal Highness, Princess Indara Tassu, sat behind the desk. Please rise. We don't have a lot of time, and I want to get to the point. Davari didn't flinch. First, it had been the head administrator. That little woman had titanium in her spine, and it seemed she didn't back down. Next, there was the conversation with Her Royal Highness Kalira. Now, it seemed, was Princess Indara's turn. At least she still had her job. For now. At Indara's bidding, she stood up, but kept herself at attention. Judging from the look on Indara's face, it was the right thing to do. I'm not a happy woman, Special Agent, she began. I've been bumping fists and meeting with a selection of faculty every 15 minutes for the last hour, and I have another hour and some to go. Also, you and I can speak alone. After that, I spend the afternoon touring the facilities, so the rest of the nobility knows the matter of their children's safety isn't being forgotten. That the royal family isn't so caught up in its own calamity that the safety of their daughters is brushed aside. I am taking my time being seen. Am I clear? Perfectly clear, Your Highness, she replied with a small nod. Good. I have reviewed your security procedures and the upgrades you've ordered. I've also looked at your arrangements before this mess, including the ones Kalira hasn't seen. Indara looked utterly poised as she steepled her fingertips. Her voice didn't change in the least as she carried on. Satora's kidnapping is going to take all my time after today, and my being here is sending a message. But I'm here to give you one, personally. You appreciate that there's no longer an heir apparent, Special Agent? I do, Your Highness. Another small nod. I certainly hope so, Agent Avari. I have views on how I want matters to come out. There is no outcome where I want anyone humming a hair on her head. Her hair? It's an expression my husband uses, Special Agent. I trust the meaning is abundantly clear. If Indara's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, her tone didn't change at all. I have reviewed your work here, including the torture of one of my cousin's close acquaintances. I have seen what you've done on paper. You have just 10 minutes to satisfy me, personally. Indara canted her head. Beginning now. So I don't have proof, but I think it's my sister's people, Malondi said quietly. The girl sat around study room B, listening. While she wasn't going to make it a habit, she'd asked the bunker to mute the room for 10 minutes. It wasn't like she didn't trust those women, but after the week at home, she knew how far the surveillance reports travelled. Her head of security is a woman named Kadira Sariva, and right now everything is pointing at her. If it's not, well, I don't know. All right, Sephir offered. I suppose that makes sense. It does, Pris nodded slowly. From what you said, all your security people agreed it was a put-up job of some kind, and she was coming after you. Yes, they all do, she nodded. Calling Indara and her family security people was glossing things over with a thick brush, but it was still true. And you're on your own because of this business with Princess Satora? Letzi asked. Think about it, Desi said. Half of Shil wants to go out searching for her, and the other half is scared about their children, and all of them are outraged. The palace needs to focus on that, and they're already stretched thin with the court gone. So, what do we do? Nesfa asked. I mean, if you don't have proof, this isn't just a casual accusation either. Even if you're a princess, this Potek woman is right. You'd be murdered in the media. Everyone taking the long view is wondering who the next heir will be. Even if no one accuses you of trying to make Kamaldri look bad, they'd wonder if it isn't a power grab of some kind. There's a lot of ways this wouldn't go well. She's right, Lux spoke up. The press will look away from a lot of things, but if you go public with something like that, they can't ignore it. All right, maybe you don't want to be ignored, but you have to have some kind of proof. Okay, so no warrant, no investigation, and no proof. One of the twins leaned forward on her elbows, summing up with a sigh. The other looked down at the table at the others. What have we got? I mean, where can you get evidence? The only place I can think of would be the Northern Palace. I could walk right in as Princess Kalira, but I need a distraction. I can't snoop around. I need a reason to be there, and even when I was, everyone would be watching me. The room fell silent, thinking it over. What about a public event? Something held there, Lark said after a moment. I mean, there's always press coverage for something big. Your sister had those garden parties. That won't happen while the Empress is away and in mourning. Nesfa shook her head. I mean, functions are going on, but an actual party would be in pretty bad taste, especially with Satora missing. It would have to be something different, dignified. What about a presentation? Lark offered. Those can be big, and nobody would look at it if it was something official. Well, things are still going on, but they have to. I mean, the news only travels so fast. Most of the Imperium is still finding out. Even better if it's someone important, so it doesn't look wrong, Nesfa nodded, sitting up and tapping her chin. Who do we know? Anyone? Well, Kazan and I don't know anyone important. Not personally, at least. I'd hate to ask Aku, Kamara said, looking over to her sister. It was a rare break in their habits. We could ask if he knows someone. Mara, I would die. After that whole thing in the library, you will be an only child. I don't think that will do, and Nesra is right. Melondi shook her head, trying to placate the pair. Someone from off-world would be better. I mean, business still has to go on for people coming into the system. Actually, I may have an idea. I could write a letter to my uncle and send it first thing tonight. Jax bit her lip, looking unusually sheepish. You know the painters? The scientists, Melondi blinked. I mean, there's the annual science prize. Are they important, though? Really? I'm kind of surprised you didn't know. I mean, I'm sure the Empress knows. Jack sat back, looking at them all with a bemused grin. Fair enough. There's a good reason House Chelsea keeps our business private. This isn't going to come out right, but your house puts on shows, trades in antiquities, and any kind of spectacle there is. Pris frowned thoughtfully. I don't understand what's private about any of that. That's sort of the other thing. You all know the Painter Institute? Jax asked. The Kerbal sisters were already leaning forward in their chairs, and she slid back in her seat despite herself. Well, a couple of years ago they patented a process for... The VCA! It revolutionized deep space astrogation and physics research, one of the twins blurted, as she bounced out in her seat, her sister right behind her. Monomolecular pattern alignment, the other one shouted. Their work in the field broke new ground, and... what I was thinking of was their work in superdense materials. Jaxme almost recoiled, as both twins canted their heads to the side and stared. Well, everyone's heard about it, but when they invented the process, my family split the things into a bunch of shell companies, covering investors from a couple of different houses. It raised the capital, but it also kept things quiet to... Jax looked over at the twins. One of them was clutching at the other, who appeared like she was going to have a stroke. I don't get it. Belda raised her hand like she was sitting in class. I heard it's a big deal for manufacturing, but that's not really my thing. Well, they're rich. Jack stole a look Melondi's way. You know how the Empress has a net worth of about 20% of the entire empire? If you took the net worth of all the shell companies and employees, and the painters themselves, they could buy about 8% of the empire. Silence fell. There's a lot of uninhabited... Pris offered hesitantly. The inhabited systems, Jack said flatly. And ever since the tech spilled into the consortium and the alliance under license, the rich inhabited systems. Oh. Belda bit her lip, then looked across the table. Kamara and Kaslin, it didn't matter which was which. Both started to wheeze. Okay, so I just have to have a word with the palace about this year's Imperial Science Award. Melondi brightened. Oh, I think I know a nice touch. Ganya Sasano had left instructions with Peli that Melondi Sandoka could visit at any time and without an appointment. The order was unusual but not unheard of. Every year had its share of special students, and things had taken a rather delightful turn with Mever and Deshin. After all these years, her protégé had a daughter. Still, even given the rather extreme circumstances, she hadn't expected to see Melondi quite so soon. As Peli closed the door, she stood behind her desk. This was still her office, after all, and she'd bow to no one, dame, duchess, or in between. Still, there were pleasantries to be observed, and she quite liked the girl. Your Royal Highness, it's an honor to meet you properly. Given the need for secrecy so recently impressed on me, I'm going to presume this is not a social visit." "I'm sorry to intrude, Head Administrator," Malondi nodded. "I know this must seem abrupt. I apologize, but there's something that won't wait, and every day that passes, well, it's important. Possibly a matter of life or death. Mine, even." "You don't mean—" "Oh!" the young woman started, turning slightly blue. "Nothing like that." "Well, thank the goddess." Ganya drew in a breath. "I think we've had quite enough excitement for one semester. Still, you said it's important. How may the Academy be of service?" "Well, my life may depend on getting certain information," she replied. "I prefer not to go into the details, Lady Sasano." "I'm not entirely certain I want them." Ganya raised an eyebrow as the princess took out her omnipad and offered to swipe over a file. Nodding slightly, as she touched a key on her desk omni and glanced over it. "I'm sorry." She looked up after reading it a second time. "You said this could be a matter of life or death?" "Very possibly, ma'am." Kalira stood firm, but she blushed ever so slightly, and Ganya considered the young woman for a moment. Kalira and Malondi were one and the same. Given some of the nobility she'd encountered over the years, it seems there really were new things under the sun. "I see. An honorary chair in science isn't unheard of, although 2 is unusual, but I do recall that Professor Zarin has spoken of them on several occasions. I will have to meet regarding the details, of course. I've taken a liberty, if it's acceptable, ma'am." Kalira blushed darker. "I don't want to overstep my bounds." "Princess, if I may speak frankly—" "Yes, please, Head Administrator." "Well then, I would observe that your bounds are the entire Empire, and while I sincerely hope that doesn't turn this academy into a battlefield, if the battle must be fought, then we shall fight it." Ganya nodded firmly. "I have any number of the nobility who come through those doors, presuming they will get whatever they want, and far too few with the courtesy to ask for what they need." That is, thank you." Kalira smiled like the 12-year-old she was. "It's just that I spoke with my cousin only an hour ago and arranged for any funding you need. She mentioned something about funding a new building." "A new building?" Ganya nodded slowly, feeling her mouth going dry. Her glass of Abeki juice was tantalizingly near, but there were limits. "I see." "Actually, she recommended a complex." Kalira looked up at Ganya under her bangs, offering a smile. "A building named for each of them?" "2 facilities." Ganya rubbed her chin thoughtfully. A princess of the Imperium was in her office acting like she needed to sell her on the idea. It was charming that she still imagined Ganya could possibly refuse. "Well, given such an unusually handsome bequest, I rather doubt the science department will disagree." "As it is, I met the widow's younger sister," Malondi said to Desi as they looked at the house. "She had a reputation for loose spending and big debts. That kind of thing got her seated at the back table, but I thought she was great company. Very, congenial." "Really? Where's she in all of this?" Desi asked curiously. "Her brother's a widower, and she isn't around to help him?" "Well, a year or 2 later the rumour was that she had all her debts cleared, right before being sent pretty far from Shill. Actually, I heard that she turned out to be a pretty good governess on the Urantilla colony. Very active, but out of sight too." "Goddess! That's the rogue system in the back of Beyond, isn't it?" "Mm-hmm. It's out between the spiral arms. I heard it's got a nice planet, but you can't get much more remote without heading to the galactic rim." "At least her brother's house wasn't hard to find." Desi looked behind them at the Temple of Nyosa that dominated the block. Situated deep in a copse of mature trees, the temple looked centuries old. "This is old money, isn't it?" "Just let me do the talking," Melondi nodded. Making their way across the street, they were received by a woman in family livery. While not ornate, the foyer was well cared for. Kembrin came out soon, giving instructions to his servant when he looked their way. Please pardon our arrival without an appointment, but do I have the pleasure of speaking with Kembrin Ekterak? That was very prettily said for someone your age. Please call me Kembrin. Crossing over, he bent his head gracefully, examining each of them discreetly. What brings you to my house? That's very kind of you, and we're sorry to arrive right after your return to Shill, but I'm on something like an official call, Melondi offered. As it happens, I'm also acquainted with your sister. Kembrin's mouth almost curved into a graceful smile. That isn't the recommendation that it ought to be, but it will suffice. But what sort of business could you possibly have with me? I apologize. Melondi took a deep breath and stayed respectfully back so she didn't loom over him. I have to ask you some questions about your late wife, Jubilee. Kembrin's smile died before it was born. After all this time? Excuse me if I find this peculiar, but it's been years now. I couldn't get action when she was murdered. And you look rather young to be serving with the Ministry of Justice or the Interior. I'm sorry. Melondi shook her head. I know I was just a child when this happened to your family, but something new has come to pass. I have been directed to speak with you by High Advocate Potak, and she's convinced there may be something suspicious about your wife's death after all. I couldn't agree more. Kembrin drew in on himself before nodding to his servant. I'll take them into the blue room. Be a dear and bring some refreshments for my guests, please. Melondi nodded to Desi as they followed a polite distance behind Kembrin as he led them into a nearby room, decorated tastefully with colours blending in an understated indigo trim along the rich wood furnishings. Sitting down, he waited as they followed suit, then nodded politely as tea was served. When the butler left, Kembrin seemed to steady himself. I can recall everything you'd want to know about my wife's death, at least everything I was allowed to know given her work, Kembrin said after a moment. Since no one has done a thing, I see no reason not to speak about it now. How may I be of help? Your wife was a member of the Interior, assigned to family protection, sir. Kembrin paled a bit but nodded. Her work was public knowledge, but not the part about family protection. Potak sent you, you said? She did. Nothing may have happened, but the advocate thinks the same as you do. Melondi nodded gently. She believes there was something very off with the whole business. Kembrin's eyes darkened. My wife was a proud woman. She wouldn't tell me anything about her work directly, but she was convinced something was wrong. Did she tell you what exactly? Melondi passed the teapot to Desi, who poured herself a second cup while quietly taking it all in. She never had the chance, Kembrin said, with steely reservation. Every inch a Shilvanti noble, and proud of his wife even in death. Even then, Melondi had a lifetime of training in reading the little signals of tone and expression. Kembrin was still grieving, and quietly furious about the murder. She went out one night, said she was going to a meeting about the matter to set things straight. She believed she was going to get hard evidence on important matters. I never saw my wife alive again. Melondi swallowed, wondering how to put it delicately, for the sake of Kembrin's sensibilities. There didn't seem any easy way to ask. I was wondering, this meeting, could you tell me anything more about it? Did she say who she was meeting with? Only that it was someone important to the whole matter she was looking at, and she intended to put a stop to things the very next day. Melondi nodded, digesting the dead end. I see. Could you tell me where she was found? As a matter of fact, yes, he said forthrightly, holding his chin up. She was murdered in an establishment called the Tide Pool. Desi couldn't stop herself as she choked on her tea and began to gasp. So, that's the only lead I have. Melondi leaned back against the table as the other girls sat around the room. It was still time before the movie, so none of the other dorm girls had come in yet. Talking was safe until they did. Besides, using the study room already seemed like it would show a lack of trust. Desi kept holding her sides, trying not to laugh. It wasn't helping. So, we're going to, Bordello? Pris asked quietly. A house of... One of the twins stammered. Ill repute? Her sister finished. You can't be serious. A blue light shop? Lexi whispered. Next to her, Belda looked around the room wildly, blushing a furious azure. A brothel! Lark crowed, as a grin stole over her face. Well, it's about time. About time? Melondi stared at her. Are you kidding? What? Lark gave a quick shrug. I was beginning to wonder if anyone here wasn't pristine. I'm not pristine, Sepho exclaimed, before hunching over and glaring. All right, so some of us may not have a boyfriend yet, but that doesn't mean we're pristine. My co-mother told me about that place when she was, entertaining clients there. Good food, you know. It's just known as... Desi was still holding her sides, shaking with barely controlled laughter. It's not just known, Desi howled. The Tide Pool is notorious. How do you know so much about it? Sepho stared at her, trying to loom while sitting down. I guess I just wasn't as sheltered, though I admit that whatever goes on there stays there. Desi sniffed and struck a pose before grinning at the girls. Look, it's pretty well known, though not just anyone can afford it. The staff is all from the lower... Well, from all over, but... I don't get it. Belda bit her lip. I mean, sex for money between consenting adults is legal in the Imperium, but... I mean, it's just so... well... not respectable? Maybe not. But some people have to pay the bills and don't want to be Marines. A lot more aren't even middle class, and they don't want to die virgins, Desi said hotly, before the grin started creeping back. Anyway, the Tide Pool isn't some cruddy dive bar. It got the name because everything washes in there. People say if they don't have it, it's either not worth doing or it doesn't exist. Oh, goddess. Well, I'll better not find out about this, Neswa breathed. Or Liam! Belda sat up, blushing furiously. What would he think of me going into Look, I need to go there. It's my only real lead, and I have to follow it up. Great. So we're Penga and Mesa from the Curious Clue crew, Lark muttered, and Neswa barked out a laugh. I understand if you don't want to come along with me on this, but I need your help. All of you, Melondi said earnestly, looking at her friends around the table. Besides, I promise we won't be in any danger. We'll take some gas from the bunker. Captain, it's official. Sergeant Diani leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tusk thoughtfully as her pod watched the feed. I fucking love our princess. Yet, even if you're engaged. To two damn fine women, no less. I never did do... Okay. You're not married yet, even if you're engaged. To two damn fine women, no less. I never did two at once. Well, not marrying anyway. Anyway, I know just the place to take you before you'll pledge yourself. Jesus. Oh, how old is this character?